Little MAGA girl was cast out of library for wearing Trump hat, but a WWII veteran walked in and shouted, "Subscribe to the channel right now to find out the end of this epic story and comment below which part of this great America you are watching from." The now presidential library stood as a colossus of white marble and varnished oak, a sanctuary dedicated to the nation's memory and the giants who forged it. The air inside was hallowed, imbued with the sweet smell of old paper and the solemnity of centuries of history. Beams of golden light pierced the tall Gothic windows, illuminating dust motes that danced in the air like the spirits of the founders watching the present. It was a place of reverence, where the silence was not empty but full of meaning, inviting reflection on liberty and sacrifice. Into this majestic setting walked Sophie. At 14, she looked like a Norman Rockwell painting come to life, an image of American purity that seemed increasingly rare in the modern world. Her blonde curls fell softly over her shoulders, framing a face of delicate features and blue eyes that shone with insatiable curiosity. She wore a simple, modest pink dress, holding the straps of her school backpack with a shy reverence. But what defined her at that moment, what made her a point of vibrant, defiant color in the academic gloom, was the night-red baseball cap resting on her head. The white letters, precisely embroidered, "Ready, Trump." To Sophie, that hat was not a war cry, nor a tool of division. It was a bond of love. It had been the last gift from her grandpa, a man who had taught her to love the flag and respect the Constitution before she even learned to read. Wearing it was her silent way of saying, "I remember, I am proud." She walked the polished corridors with light steps, feeling small before the ceiling-high stacks, eager to find books on the founding fathers for her school project. However, the peace of that temple of knowledge was about to be shattered. What Sophie didn't know, in her youthful innocence, was that the library was no longer just a repository of books. It had become a silent ideological battlefield. And the guardian of that gate was not there to protect knowledge, but to filter the ideological purity of the visitors. Behind the central mahogany counter stood the chief librarian, a middle-aged woman, her face marked not by age, but by perpetual bitterness. Her thick-rimmed glasses hung on the tip of her nose, and her eyes scanned the hall with the precision of radar searching for moral infractions. She was the embodiment of the institutionalized radical left, one who believes her divine mission is to re-educate the public and purge any trace of traditional thought. When her gaze crossed with Sophie's red hat, the shift in her posture was instant and visceral. Bureaucratic indifference gave way to a cold, calculating fury. To her, this 14-year-old was not a student, she was an affront. The MAGA hat was, in her reality, distorted by the woke virus. His equivalent to a symbol of extreme hate. Sophie's mere existence in this inclusive space was a provocation that needed to be neutralized. The librarian abandoned her post. Her low heels echoed on the marble floor with an aggressive, fast, and determined rhythm. She wasn't walking to help, she was marching to confront. Sophie, distracted by reading the spine of an Abraham Lincoln biography, didn't notice the storm approaching until a cold shadow covered the light, illuminating her book. "You." The woman's voice cut the respectful silence like a whip. It wasn't a shout, but a sibilant whisper laden with a venom that made Sophie shiver. "What do you think you're doing here?" Sophie turned quickly, her eyes wide with surprise. She clutched the book to her chest, an instinctive gesture of protection. I'm looking for information for school, ma'am, about the Declaration of Independence." The librarian let out a short, dry laugh devoid of any joy. She took a step forward, invading Sophie's personal space, forcing the girl to back up until her back touched the cold wood of the bookshelf. "Independence," the woman sneered, her face contorting into a mask of disgust. "You dare speak of American values while profaning this sacred precinct with that rag of hate on your head. Do you have any idea how offensive your presence is to decent people?" Sophie's heart pounded. Fear rose in her throat, suffocating. She had never been treated with such hostility by an adult. "I'm sorry. It's just my hat. My grandpa gave it to me." "I don't care who gave it to you." The librarian raised her voice, the mask of civility completely dropping. That symbol represents intolerance, racism, the destruction of democracy. You are turning this library into a stage for your fascist propaganda. We are a safe space, girl, and that means safe from people like you." The cruel irony of those words, excluding someone in the name of inclusion, hit Sophie with the force of a physical punch. She looked around, searching for help. There were a few college students at nearby tables, but instead of intervening, they lowered their eyes or pulled out their cell phones, ready to film the humiliation, silent accomplices to this modern inquisition. Sophie was alone. The immensity of the library now felt like a prison, and the busts of the presidents seemed to look down on her with sadness. "Take it off," the librarian ordered, extending an accusing finger that trembled with contained rage. "Take that abomination off right now. You do not have the right to display your hate here." "But it's my freedom." Sophie tried to argue, her voice failing, tears beginning to blur her vision. "Your freedom ends where my right not to be visually assaulted begins," the woman screamed. In a fit of authoritarianism, with a brusque gesture of impatience, she violently gestured, her hand hitting the stack of books Sophie was holding. Thud. The heavy books fell to the floor, the noise echoing through the high arches, breaking the sacred silence. Sophie let out a muffled cry and flinched, looking at the scattered volumes at her feet, her country's history thrown to the floor by the fanaticism of the one who should preserve it. She felt tiny, humiliated, and defenseless. The patriotic girl was on her knees, figuratively and almost literally, under the boot of ideological intolerance, while the shadow of tyranny lengthened over her. Sophie knelt on the cold marble, her trembling fingers brushing the hardcovers of the scattered books. The fall of the history volumes seemed to have echoed not only in the hall, but inside her chest, breaking something fragile. She reached out to pick up a biography of George Washington, but the librarian's voice cut the air again, sharp as a scalpel, paralyzing her movement. "Don't touch them!" the woman hissed, looming over Sophie like a tower of moral judgment. "Your hands are not worthy to touch the history that you and your kind are trying to rewrite with hate and ignorance." Sophie retracted her hand, startled, as if she had been burned. She looked up, and the sight was terrifying. The librarian no longer looked like a public employee. Under the diffuse light entering through the Gothic windows, she looked like a medieval inquisitor, fueled by the fanatical certainty of her own virtue. The smell of old paper, which had been comforting, now seemed suffocating, mixed with the static electricity of hostility. "Get up!" the leftist commanded, crossing her arms over her thin chest, covered by a grey cardigan. "Stop playing the victim. It's always the same tactic with you people. You provoke, you assault with your symbols of oppression, and when confronted you cry fake crocodile tears." Sophie slowly rose, her legs shaky. She felt naked under the gazes beginning to converge on her from all corners of the hall. The college students at the nearby tables, who should be defenders of free thought, had transformed into a cruel audience. No one offered help. On the contrary, smartphones were raised, black lenses pointed at her like the barrels of digital guns. Sophie could hear the whispers, the muffled giggles, the silent judgment of a generation indoctrinated to see the red hat not as a political opinion, but as a moral crime. "I'm not using any tactic," Sophie whispered, her choked voice struggling to emerge. She adjusted the pink backpack on her shoulder, a childlike gesture of self-protection. "I just wanted to read. My grandpa says reading makes us free." The mention of her grandpa made the librarian's face contort into an even greater grimace of disgust. "Your grandpa," she repeated with scorn, as if the word were dirty. "He's probably the reason you're so lost. Did he fill your head with outdated nationalist myths? Did he teach you to worship flags instead of fighting for equity? Poor girl. You are a byproduct of a dying patriarchal system, and you don't even realize it." The psychological aggression was relentless. The librarian used words Sophie barely understood: patriarchal, systemic, equity. But the girl felt the violence behind them. They were weapons used to deconstruct who she was, to make her feel ashamed for loving her family and her country. The woman took another step forward, cornering Sophie against the oak bookshelf. The round little MAGA girl, Kim, was trapped. Behind her, the weight of history. Ahead, the fury of the WWII present. "Let's resolve this now," the librarian said, extending her open palm. "Demanding submission. I will not allow you to continue polluting this safe learning environment. Hand over the hat. Now." Sophie's heart beat so hard it ached against her ribs. That hat was not just fabric and thread. It was the memory of her grandpa's smile when he told stories about the war, about how America saved the world from darkness. Handing over the hat would be betraying those stories. It would be admitting the librarian was right. "No," Sophie said. The word came out low, trembling but firm. She put both hands on her head, gripping the brim of the red hat tightly, as if it were a crown about to be stolen. "It's mine. It's my First Amendment right to free expression. The First Amendment says—" "Shut up about the First Amendment." The librarian exploded, losing any last shred of professional composure. The scream echoed loudly, startling even the most distant observers. "You don't have the right to use the Constitution to protect your fanaticism. Your freedom hurts people. Your presence here is an act of psychological violence against every minority who frequents this library." The distorted logic of the radical left-hand was complete. The victim was the aggressor, and silencing was justice. "You have two options, girl." The woman growled, her face red with anger, her finger pointed inches from Sophie's nose. "Option 1. You hand over that fascist trash to me now, and I throw it where it belongs, in the trash can, and you can stay quietly in a corner reading approved books. Option 2. I call campus security and the local police. Tell them you are inciting disorder and threatening staff, and you will be permanently banned from every public library in the state, and believe me, I'll make sure your school knows about it." The threat was brutal and totalitarian. Sophie felt the ground disappear beneath her feet. Banned? School notified? She imagined the shame of her parents, the scandal. Paralyzing fear overcame her. She looked to the sides, seeking any look of compassion, but only found the coldness of cell phone screens and the arrogance of the librarian. "Pa, why are you so mean?" Sophie sobbed, the tears finally winning the battle and flowing freely. "I'm just a kid." "You are not a child," the woman retorted, cold as ice. "You're a seed of evil, and it is my duty to prevent you from germinating." The librarian moved forward. Her hand was no longer just asking. She was going to grab. She was going to rip the hat off by force. The violation of Sophie's physical space was imminent. The girl flinched, closing her eyes, waiting for the final humiliation, waiting to feel her grandpa's gift torn from her head by hands full of ideological hate. The despair was absolute. The America she loved seemed to have died in that hall, choked by the intolerance of those who claimed to preach tolerance. Sophie was alone in the dark, about to be crushed. The librarian's bony fingers were millimeters from the brim of the red hat. Time seemed to have frozen in that instant of imminent violation. Sophie squeezed her eyes shut, hunching her shoulders, waiting to feel the violent pull that would rip away not only her grandpa's gift, but her dignity. She held her breath, the acrid smell of the woman's rage invading her nostrils. The triumph of intolerance seemed inevitable, sealed by the complicit silence of a library full of passive spectators. "Step away from her! Now!" The order was not just heard, it was felt. The shout echoed through the oak and marble arches with the force of a cannon shot, instantly shattering the atmosphere of intimidation. It wasn't the hysterical scream of an internet argument. It was the deep, guttural roar of command, a voice forged on battlefields where real men decided the fate of the world. The librarian froze. Her hand stopped in mid-air, trembling, hovering over Sophie's head like the claw of a petrified bird of prey. She blinked, the arrogance draining from her pale face, and slowly turned her head toward the entrance of the main hall. There, silhouetted against the sunlight streaming through the double doors, was him. The chapter son, WWII veteran. He didn't seem to belong to this century, and that was his greatest strength. He wore his old khaki service uniform, immaculately pressed, although the fabric showed the subtle signs of decades of reverent care. On his chest, above the left pocket, a row of medals caught the light: the Sin Decent Purple Heart, the Sin Silver Star, the Sin Victory Medal. Every piece of metal and colored ribbon was a silent scream of sacrifice, witnesses to blood spilled on distant beaches so that places like that library could exist. He leaned on a dark wooden cane, but his posture was ramrod straight, defying gravity and age. His hair was snow white, but his eyes burned with a blue fire of righteous indignation that made the students put down their cell phones, ashamed. The sound of his boot and the tip of his cane hitting the marble, tap, 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 was the only noise in the hall as he advanced. He didn't run, he marched, and with every step the librarian's moral authority shrank until it became insignificant. He stopped exactly between the woman and Sophie, placing his frail body, yet armored by honor, as an impassable barrier. He looked at the librarian, and the difference in spiritual stature was abysmal. "What do you think you're doing, ma'am?" the veteran asked, his voice low now, but vibrating with a dangerous intensity. "I've seen enemies try to forcibly tear people's identity away. I've seen tyrants burn books and forbid symbols, but I never thought I'd live to see this happen inside an American institution, done by someone who is supposed to protect freedom." The librarian tried to regain her composure. She nervously adjusted her glasses, trying to invoke her usual rhetoric, but the words seemed hollow before this living monument. "You don't understand," she stammered, her voice failing. This is a matter of community safety. This girl is displaying a symbol of hate. I'm just keeping the environment safe for—" "Safe?" The veteran cut her off with a dry wave of his hand. "You talk about safety while terrorizing a 14-year-old girl. You talk about hate when I see the venom dripping from your eyes." He pointed his cane at the American flag that hung limply in a corner of the hall, forgotten. "I left my friends behind on the beaches of Normandy. I saw 18-year-old boys take their last breath in the mud so that you could have the right to be foolish, ungrateful, and arrogant. But they didn't die so you could become the dictator of this little fiefdom of books. The Constitution, ma'am, doesn't have an asterisk that says except if the librarian doesn't like your hat. The librarian recoiled a step, physically pushed back by the truth of those words. The narrative she had built, that she was the hero fighting fascism, crumbled. Before her stood the true anti-fascist, the man who had looked real evil in the eyes and defeated it. She's disturbing the peace. The woman tried one last desperate card, pointing at Sophie, who was still on the floor, looking up at the veteran with admiration and tears in her eyes. The veteran slowly turned and looked at Sophie. The harsh expression on his face instantly softened, transforming into a grandfatherly tenderness. He extended his hand, ignoring the pain in his arthritic joints. "Get up, soldier," he said softly. "Don't kneel before tyrants. Never." Sophie grasped his hand. It was calloused, warm, and firm. She felt a current of strength pass from him to her. She stood up, wiping her knees, straightening her pink dress. The veteran adjusted the Trump hat on her head, ensuring it was perfectly aligned, a gesture of crowning and defiance. "The hat stays," the veteran declared, turning back to the antagonist and the audience of students. His voice projected clear and strong. "The First Amendment doesn't exist to protect the speech you like. It exists to protect the speech you hate. If you can't stand to see a red hat without losing your humanity, then the problem isn't the hat, ma'am. The problem is your soul." A heavy silence fell over the hall, but this time it was not the silence of fear. It was the silence of collective shame. The librarian was paralyzed, mouth agape, disarmed. The veteran had won the confrontation without raising his voice again, simply using the undeniable weight of truth and history. He stood beside Sophie, a khaki sentinel next to the pink dress. "We're going to pick up these books," he said, looking at the volumes on the floor. "Because we respect history, even if you try to erase it." The intervention was absolute. The physical attack was prevented and the moral attack was reversed. But the librarian, humiliated before her audience, still held the power of bureaucracy in her hands. The battle in the arena of ideas had been won, but institutional revenge still hung in the air like a toxic cloud. The silence that followed the veteran's words was not empty. It was heavy, loaded with the sudden weight of reality invading the ideological bubble of the library. The librarian, moments before a giant of authority, seemed to have physically shrunk. Her narrative as a social justice warrior had been pulverized by the unquestionable presence of someone who had bled for real justice. She looked around, hoping for validation, hoping the students would rise to her defense, but found only averted glances and bowed heads. Shame, that feeling the radical left has tried to root out of their consciences, was back. However, as is typical of those who hold a small bureaucratic power and no moral authority, the humiliation did not generate remorse, but a petty desire for institutional revenge. If she couldn't win on the field of ideas, she would use the rules, the regulations, and the cold weight of the system to crush them. With trembling hands, no longer from rage, but from impotent frustration, the librarian retreated behind the mahogany counter, creating a physical barrier between her and the patriotic duo. She picked up the desk phone, her fingers dialing with excessive force, her knuckles white. "You think this is over, mister?" she hissed, her trembling voice echoing through the hall. "You may have your medals and your old stories, but in here, I am the law. I'm calling campus security and the local police. Both of you will be cited for trespassing, disturbing the peace, and harassment of a public employee." She looked directly at Sophie, her eyes shining with calculated malice. "And you, young lady, prepare yourself. I'm taking your information. I will send a formal report to the school board of the district. I will ensure this goes on to your permanent record. When you try to get into college in a few years, this stain of intolerance will be waiting for you. Your parents will receive a notification that their daughter was expelled for hate conduct. Let's see how much you like your hat when it costs you your future. The threat was surgical. For a 14-year-old girl, the mention of permanent record, still police destiru and ses parents was the equivalent of the end of the world. The blood drained from Sophie's face. Her hands, which had just stopped trembling thanks to the veteran, started to sweat cold again. The fear of cancellation, of social destruction, was a powerful weapon the system used to keep dissent in line. "Sir," Sophie whispered, gently pulling on the sleeve of the veteran's uniform. "What if she does it? I don't want to hurt my parents. Maybe I should just leave." The veteran didn't move. He didn't even look at the phone the woman held like a weapon. He let out a short, dry laugh, devoid of fear, the kind of laugh from someone who has seen the worst humanity can offer and survived. "Let her call, Sophie," he said, loud enough for the librarian to hear. "Let her call the police. Let her call the principal, the mayor, the governor. I'd be delighted to explain to a law enforcement officer why a public employee is threatening to destroy the life of an honor student over a cotton hat." He slowly turned to the librarian, resting both hands on his cane, his posture unwavering. "Go ahead, ma'am. Make the call, but tell them exactly who is here. Tell them that Sergeant Major William T. Kowalski of the 101st Airborne, decorated for bravery under enemy fire, is awaiting their arrival to file a complaint for discrimination and abuse of a minor." The mention of the name and rank, spoken with such gravity, made the librarian hesitate. The phone stopped halfway to her ear. She knew, deep in her bureaucratic mind, that the optics of that situation would be disastrous for her. The image of security guards dragging an elderly war hero and a tearful girl out of the library would go viral, but not the way she wanted. The veteran noticed the hesitation and struck with the final truth. "You people love to use the system to intimidate, don't you? You threaten with careers, with schools, with reputations, but you forget one thing. The truth is not afraid of threats. The permanent record you should worry about is the one being written in the sky, not on a school computer. You lost here today, not because I'm stronger, but because you are wrong. And deep down, you know it." The librarian slammed the phone onto the receiver violently, the plastic sound echoing like a failed shot. She was livid, defeated in her own power game. "Get out," she mumbled, her voice hoarse with contained hate. "Get out now before I change my mind, but don't think I'll forget your faces. You are not welcome here." With a final look of contempt, she turned her back and disappeared through a side door, slamming it shut, fleeing the light of truth into the shadows of her office, where she could lick the wounds of her injured ego. The hall was silent again, but now it was a silence of peace, not of oppression. The immediate threat had receded. The veteran sighed, the weight of age seeming to return momentarily to his shoulders now that the battle was over. He looked at Sophie and smiled gently. "It's okay now, little one. The dragon has gone back to the cave." He pointed with his cane at the books still scattered on the floor. "Come on," he said. "A good soldier never leaves the battlefield messy, and a good American never leaves history lying on the floor." Together, the old warrior and the young student began to pick up the volumes. Sophie picked up the biography of George Washington with reverence, dusting off the cover with her sleeve. As they worked side by side, she looked up at the veteran with a painful curiosity. "Why do they hate us so much?" she asked, her voice small in the immensity of the library. "It's just a hat. Why did she want to destroy my future because of it?" The veteran picked up a heavy book on the Constitution and handed it to her. His eyes met hers, transmitting a wisdom not learned in modern schools. "It's not about the hat, Sophie. It never was. The hat is just a symbol that you don't belong to them. They hate the hat because it represents disobedience. They want you to be afraid. They want you to believe that the only way to succeed in life is to agree with everything they say, bow your head, and apologize for existing." He lightly touched the red brim with the Trump inscription. "When you wear that, you are saying, 'I am free.' And for people who want to control everything, from what you read to what you think, the freedom of a 14-year-old girl is the most terrifying thing in the world. Their hate is, in fact, fear. Fear that you will inspire others to be free, too." Sophie hugged the books to her chest. The veteran's words dissipated the black cloud of the librarian's threat. She wasn't wrong. She wasn't evil. She was just free. "I won't let her scare me," Sophie said. And there was a new firmness in her voice, a newly forged steel. "I will study, I will go to college, and I will do it wearing my hat." "That's the spirit." The veteran nodded approvingly. "They might have the institutions for now, but we have the truth, and the truth, my dear, always wins in the end. It might take time, it might be difficult, but it wins." They finished picking up the books. The library felt lighter now. The late afternoon sun entered the windows at a lower angle, bathing the hall in shades of gold and amber. The bureaucratic threat still existed outside, in the distorted world of politics and cancellation. But right there, in that moment, order had been restored. The storm had passed, but Sophie's journey was just beginning. She needed to leave that library not as a victim who escaped, but as a winner who triumphed. They walked through the heavy oak doors of the WWII Presidential Library, leaving behind the stale air of intolerance and emerging into the golden light of the late afternoon. The contrast was immediate. The fresh street air seemed to clear Sophie's lungs, dissipating the smell of fear and mothballs that had permeated the last few minutes. Outside, the world continued to spin, indifferent to the small, epic battle that had just been fought. But for Sophie, everything felt different. The colors were more vivid, the sound of traffic sharper. She had entered that building as a curious girl. She was leaving as a survivor. Sergeant Major Kowalski stopped at the top of the stone staircase that led to the sidewalk. He took a deep breath, leaning heavily on his cane. The adrenaline of the confrontation was subsiding, and the fatigue of his 90 years was starting to take its toll, but his eyes still shone with the satisfaction of duty done. "Are you all right, soldier?" he asked, looking at Sophie with a paternal gentleness. Sophie nodded, clutching the straps of her pink backpack. She looked at the old warrior, seeing not just an elderly man, but a wall of strength. "I am, sir. Thanks to you. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't shown up. I felt so alone." The veteran shook his head, a sad smile curving the corners of his lips. He looked at the horizon, where the WWII American flag fluttered on the courtyard flagpole, its colors bright against the blue sky. "You are never alone, Sophie. That's what they want you to think. They want to isolate you, make you believe you're the only one who still loves this country, that you're the only odd one out for wearing that hat. But that's a lie." He pointed with his cane at the city around them, at the passing cars, at the people working. "There are millions of us, the silent majority, people who love God, love their families, and love freedom. We are everywhere. It's just that sometimes we need a reminder to speak up." He reached into the chest pocket of his military tunic, fumbling for something precious. With a solemn movement, he withdrew a small booklet, worn by time, with yellowed edges and a cracked leather cover. "Take this," he said, handing the object to Sophie. This traveled with me from Normandy to the Eagles of Berlin. It was in my pocket when I came home, when I got married, when I saw my grandchildren born." Sophie took the booklet with reverence. On the cover, in nearly faded gold letters, read, "The Constitution of the United States of America." "It's not just paper, my dear," the veteran continued, his voice choked. "It is the most powerful shield ever forged. That woman in there, she's afraid of it. She's afraid of the words written there, because those words say you are free, that no one, not librarians, not politicians, not kings, can take your voice away." Sophie caressed the cover of the booklet. It was warm, as if it retained the heat of the veteran's heart. "Read it," Kowalski instructed. "Learn it, and the next time someone tells you your hat is hate, or that your patriotism is wrong, you don't need to cry. You cite your rights. Knowledge is the only weapon they cannot confiscate." "I promise, sir," Sophie said, and this time there was no tremor in her voice. There was steel. "I will honor this. I will honor what you did for me." The veteran smiled, satisfied. He straightened his posture, ignoring the pain in his back, and raised his right hand in a slow, sharp, and perfect military salute. "Mission accomplished, Sophie. Go home, study, grow, and keep wearing that red hat. The future of America depends on brave girls like you, who are not afraid to hold the torch when the rest of the world wants to put it out." Sophie, in a burst of gratitude, hugged the old soldier. It was a quick, clumsy hug, but full of genuine love. The veteran, surprised for a moment, lightly patted her back. All right. No sentimentality," he grumbled, disguising his own emotion, but his eyes were moist. Sophie stepped back, smiling. She put the bean Constitution in the front pocket of her backpack, right next to her heart, and began to descend the stairs. As she walked along the sidewalk, something magical happened. The world seemed to respond to her moral victory. A group of construction workers, taking a break across the street, saw the red hat and the veteran's uniform at the top of the stairs. They instinctively understood the scene. One of them raised his fist in the air and yelled, "USA 2024!" Another took off his hard hat in respect. A mother passing by with a stroller smiled at Sophie and said, "Nice hat, sweetie. Don't let anyone bully you." The librarian and her toxic ideology had tried to turn Sophie into an outcast, but they failed miserably. Instead of shame, Sophie found community. Instead of silence, she found support. She stopped at the corner and looked back one last time. Sergeant Major Kowalski was still there, a solitary sentinel against the twilight, guarding the entrance to history. He nodded once, and then turned to resume his silent vigil for freedom. Sophie touched the brim of her Trump hat. It no longer felt heavy. It felt like a crown. The humiliation was gone, washed away by the truth. She lifted her chin, adjusted her backpack, and turned toward the setting sun, walking with firm steps toward her future. The narrative of hate failed. The attempt at cancellation collapsed. Because in the end, the tyranny of the radical left, however loud and institutionalized, is fragile as glass before the solid rock of untraditional values. Innocence was protected, history was preserved, and little MAGA girl discovered that as long as there are patriots willing to say, "No, America will never fall. Freedom won."